Paul, you've got some questions for Emerson. Go hard, mate.
What are those early stages that begin with the financial process?
Well, one of the first steps after if they already own a piece of land, it's fine. You can use part of the land up to 50% normally. You could do a first mortgage on that raw land. So you have a piece of land. Let's say it's got a value of $500,000 as an example. We can usually you could do a financing of 50%. So they own the land outright. You could borrow 50% of that to make your initial deposits. So for you guys, we have to prepay before you make deliveries, correct?
That's correct.
What's the down payment? So what percentage is normally required before you would start your process from your end? What do you guys require?
On average, like allowing building permit costs, development fee costs to the township and other permit documents, design payments, and materials deposit. So all these items before ultimately a project happens and a building permit is received, usually range somewhere between 100 to 150,000, depending on the size of the house.
Okay. Perfect. So what we normally recommend to people is that if you have to have some money up front, because you're going to almost prepay. They're going to pay for the deposits for equipment, and then on a construction loan, it's usually done as a draw. But if you have nothing if you have an empty wallet, then this process would be more difficult. If you're selling an existing home, we could take some equity from that home to use as your initial deposit for your materials. And then from there, normally it's done in phases. So most people and most lenders like to do it in usually about 3 or 4 draws. So the first draw would be from, let's say, from the permits up to, let's say, you have the walls up. And then once that part's complete, you'd receive your next draw. That would pay for the next round of construction, and so on until you're at 100% completion. And then when you're at 100% completion, we can then just do a traditional mortgage as opposed to construction mortgage.
So how many draws are on a typical construction mortgage?
No, most people would go with about 4. There's not a limit on some lenders will cap it. Other lenders, you can do as many as you like. However, it's cost prohibitive. If every time you're doing a draw, you've got to go to a lawyer, you're going to be paying a fee. So most people, what I would suggest to people is to try and keep it down to about 4 draws.
And is the 4, if there is 4 draws, does that, like, just doing the simple math, thinking about that, does that mean that ultimately 25% of the project is dispersed in each one of those draw payments?
Correct. That's the general idea. With a passive house, it's a little different because it's much faster process. So if once their slabs down and once the foundation is ready, delivery is made of let's say it's the wall panels. It goes far more quickly than a traditional build. So on a traditional build, you might have just the walls going up, and then the dry walls are working on that piece. You're going to get the wiring done. Whereas when I watched our passive house being built, the process was very fast. So once the slab and the foundation was ready, the builders show up with the crane, and it was like almost Legos. They just kind of put those big pieces together, put the roof trusses on, and it was enclosed within, if memory serves me correctly, it was enclosed within about a week.
Wow.
Cool. So after the foundation is complete, is the first draw that the financial institution is able to release? Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
So,
okay. So 25. So what I think, does that mean that people need to have ultimately 25% of the value of the project?
Yeah, they need
in hand.
Yeah, you need to have cash at hand because you're prepaying certain costs yourself ahead of time. All of your permits, all of your designs, all of the things that the engineers require, the architectural drawings, all of those things need to be in place before you get started. So it depends on the lender, but normally they want to see, in the very least, the once the permits are in place, then they can look at doing a financing. If permits are not in place, some lenders will not. They want to know that it's real, and it's not real until till the permit process is started.
Okay. Now, like some of our customers recently have engaged with, I'm not sure if they're banks or other private lenders through brokers, but 5 to 6 draws instead of your typical 3 to 4. So is in with the lenders that you deal with, is that possible? Do some of them have unlimited draws even, or
you can, but yeah, the issue isn't so much how many draws you want to do. It's just becomes expensive. Every time you go in to get a draw done, we have to have an appraisal done. So before a draw is made, appraiser comes out. They want to see what stage are you at here. So are you at 5%, 25%, 55%? So every time a draw is made, an appraisal is done just to see to determine where you are. I would suggest to people you don't want to do too many draws simply because the disbursements go through the lawyer. So every time you're doing an extra disbursement, you're going back to the lawyer and you're going to be paying a fee. And then you also have to remember that there's always a 10% holdback. So for the Building Construction Act, there's a holdback, and that goes, I think it's 45 days. I can't remember the exact amount. I'm not sure if it's 45 or 60 days. But after you've completed the build, you have to wait until that 10%. Sorry, let me rephrase that. You have to wait until that time frame is cleared before they release that final amount.
Yeah, which would be standard, right, for all the lenders out there, just following the rules. So when I think about let's just say on average, the value of a project is $600,000, to bring some numbers into the conversation. With the 3 draw payment, technically, like the customer the client, the homeowner would require approximately $150,000 cash in hand and to get the project moving. But let's say they're it's a young family and they just don't have that money and don't want to ask family members for a loan. Would that be a good would they be in the best position to go with a 6 draw schedule with the lender that would offer that to them, for example, for requiring less cash in hand?
Well, that doesn't really make a difference. The lenders, whether you want to do it as 3 draws or 5 draws or whatever, that the lenders don't really care about that portion. It's more an issue of getting the funds up front to pay for the panels to get the process rolling. But because there's different sets of costs when you're doing a passive house, because you're going to prepay. Whereas on a normal project, you're buying your lumber, you're buying your materials, but you're not the initial outlay is higher on the passive side versus if you're buying your lumber, you're buying your pieces, you're doing it piecemeal. Yeah. Here is a more regimented process.
For the young family, or any customer for the matter of fact, that doesn't have enough cash in hand up front to pay for the material deposits, to pay for all that money that's required to get the project going, but they do have jobs that approve them for the overall cost of the build, no problem with respect to mortgage payments, just having trouble with the upfront costs. Is there anything that can be done?
Yes, there's some people they can use their own means. You could use your line of credit or a loan. However, the most cost-effective loan is a loan that's going to be secured against property. That's going to give you the best rate. But if they don't have another asset yet, that option wouldn't be available to them. So then you're going to be borrowing money at the open market rates, which can be a little higher. If they own a piece of land that they want to build on, we can borrow money against the land and then use that as your stepping stone.
Okay.
So that's a common option. So you own a piece of land. So in my case, we own the land that we built on. So then you could borrow against that piece of land, and you can use that as your first portion. But keep in mind that on a construction loan, it's not the same as when you're buying a house. So normally, if you're buying a house, you want to have that 20% down payment. So you'd use something similar. So that money that would be used as a down payment. You're not doing a down payment on a construction financing end, so you could use that money there. But there has to be some money saved up. If you're buying any house, there's a down payment required.
That's right. So a lot of our customers, just thinking through things here, do fund the project off of a home equity line of credit. Now, am I right in thinking that the home equity line of credit it's ultimately capped at the difference between what someone owes on the home and the valuation of that home, right? Is that
it's the available equity. So some lenders will allow you to go up to about 80%, but normally line of credit, you're not going to go much above 65% of the value of the property. So if you have $1 million mortgage, you have $1 million property, you don't owe anything on it, you could do a line of credit for roughly around $650,000.
Wow. Okay. So someone could if it worked out with the numbers, take out a home equity line of credit to fund the project in the early stages.
Correct.
And couple that with a construction mortgage. Is that what typically
correct?
Is done?
That's generally the most common way. So the majority of the mortgages I've done for people who are buying a passive type house or a construction finance, they have an existing property. So they have a line of credit on the property that they live in. They will use that line of credit as the seed to start the next project. And then once the project is going, they're gonna eventually be selling them the house that they're in, and they're gonna be moving into your build in this case. So yeah, a person could use their existing property as that stepping stone.
Cool. So, like this year is a little bit different from a lending perspective, right? With the interest rates,
yes,
compared to the past few years. So like we're up at, are we 5%? Are we 7%? I don't know.
Prime rate, basically the Bank of Canada, I believe it's 4.25% right now. It's a funny one because everybody's looking at saying, oh my goodness, rates are high. Rates are not high. Rates are more or less fairly normal. I think we've been spoiled over the last several years by you had COVID, and because of COVID, the economy took a hit. Bank of Canada, U.S. Federal Reserve, European Central Bank, they all lowered rates to try and stimulate the economy. But an interest rate of 0 is not normal. That is by no means normal. Those low rates made cost of borrowing too cheap, and that jacked up the house prices. Because all of a sudden, it was very easy to qualify in a mortgage because the rates were so low. If you have a limited supply of houses and cheap money, that's inflationary. It pushed up the price of housing. So what we're looking at right now are fairly normal rates. You can see a 5-year fixed around 4.5%, 4.75%. Those are normal rates. But people are thinking back to what it was like 2 years ago when prime was basically 0. So because of that, they were saying, "Oh my goodness, it's expensive." And it's not that the rates right now are not expensive. These are well within normal ranges. 21% back in the early 80s, that was horrible. There have been several times where rates have been into the double digits. 6-7% is not. That's still a normal rate. The only thing that makes it difficult today is that it's not the rates; it's the house prices. If a mortgage rate was 4.5%, but the house you're looking at was only $300,000 or $400,000, it's not a big deal. But now you're looking at the average house price in Toronto over $1 million, and so that's what makes it expensive. So when you have $1 million and you've got even a normal rate of 4.5%, suddenly it becomes expensive to people, and that's the difficulty. It's not so much the rates; it's the fact that house prices are higher. But I always encourage people to look at what's the cost to live in this house. So what is my cost for my mortgage? What is my cost to maintain this house? That's how you have to look at it. Don't fixate on the rate. You have to fixate what's your cash flow. How much money is left to pay for what I need to pay for?
Mm-hmm.
You want to live in a house, you need furniture in that house.
Is there a general rule of thumb, like again, the mortgage payment and income?
Yes,
The two.
there are some rules which you cannot get around. If you're placing a mortgage through a traditional lender, 44% is the maximum. 44% of your income is the maximum a mortgage is allowed to be. So 44% of your disposable income. So let's say you've got let's say it's $100,000. Let's do some numbers for you.
Mm-hmm.
Divide it by 12. About $100,000, you've got about $8,300 per month. Divide that, to multiply that by 44%. So that basically the maximum mortgage amount that would be allowed for this person would be $3,666 per month. However, that's not including if you have car payments or other liabilities, it's going to deduct from that. So $3,666. If he had no other debts, he didn't owe any money, that's the maximum mortgage we would be allowed to do. If you have, let's say you've got a car lease or you have credit card debts, that's going to detract from this available amount of money. But a traditional lender, you cannot go above 44%. That's it. Outside of that, you can go with a different type. I can have alternative lenders, which will sometimes have an extended ratio of upwards of sometimes 50%, but 44 is the general rule.
Cool. So is there like, what's the forecast for is that known, or is there anything to expect? Are rates going to continue to go up, or have we hit a plateau where this is just a new rate moving into the future? Is there any intel on that?
Well, basically there's things, it's hard to predict because there are things that are not predictable. Nobody predicted COVID. Nobody predicted a war in the Ukraine. So those were not on the economic radar for the Bank of Canada. They didn't predict that the Russians were going to attack their next door neighbors, and in doing so, you got inflation. And inflation, the Bank of Canada's job is to keep inflation at that target range of about 2 to 2.5%. That's what they want to. That's what they try to maintain. If the economy gets too hot, they will use interest rates, kind of like the brakes or accelerator on a car. So you want to slow that car down. They're using interest rates to slow down that car, or in this case, slow down the economy. Inflation is the biggest fear for the Bank of Canada. They are concerned about the overall economy, but it's inflation. Inflation is their mandate. They have to make sure that we don't end up like Zimbabwe or countries where you've got, you go into the store for a wheelbarrow for a few $1 million to go buy a loaf of bread. That's inflation. So their job is to maintain inflation. At the last Bank of Canada meeting, they didn't do anything. They kept it flat, and then they're going to reevaluate. If we start seeing the job numbers came out today, and we're still producing a lot of jobs. So if the economy becomes too hot, or the Bank of Canada feels uncertain or nervous about it, they might be forced to raise the rates again. The United States raised rates by 25 basis points, or sorry, 0.25%, 2 days ago. So the Americans they're concerned about inflation. As it stands right now, the Bank of Canada seems satisfied, but time will tell. If inflation is still strong, if the job market is still overheated, you can expect to see another rate increase.
I see. Okay, so I mean that time will tell, and I guess important to have a bit of a contingency to allow for rates to go up for anyone looking at build would make most sense. Emerson, as a mortgage broker, why does it make the most sense to build a passive home?
Well, just two pieces. One, you're taking on debt. Your mortgage's odds are it's going to be the largest debt you're ever going to embark upon. So you want to buy the best asset I can afford. So if I'm buying a house, a traditional house, my house in the city is not built anywhere near as well as my house here in Muskoka. My passive house is far cheaper to run. So at the end of the day, as a mortgage broker, we're looking at cash flow. We want to make sure that this person has the cash flow to live comfortably in their home. If their heating costs have exploded because their house is inefficient and it's baseboard electric, they're not going to have any disposable income. It's going to be very expensive. And then you have to look at the resale value. If this house looks good 20 years from now and it's still in great condition, you've got good quality windows and good quality materials, the house will hold its value. If the house is poorly made, you've spent a lot of money on something that's going to require a lot of maintenance, and maintenance is expensive. So a passive house is a well-built home, and a well-built home means your maintenance costs are going to be lower. Your costs to run the house are lower because you're not using up as much electricity or natural gas or wood or whatever your heat source is. It's efficient. When we were going through the process of having our house designed, we thought about things like how energy efficient is the freezer, how energy efficient is the lighting systems, and you bring that into the picture right from the beginning, and it keeps your costs down. So when I look at sorry, so when I compare my house here in Muskoka to my house that I lived in Mississauga, there is no comparison. The cost to run that, the cost to heat it, the cost to cool it, there's no comparison, none whatsoever.
I was just going to ask you that, and you know, I think back on those numbers you were just telling us on you know, amount that someone can afford from a mortgage payment perspective versus income. And you know, what really is part of that equation of when it comes down to affordability and disposable income, and you know, just overall quality of life, is cost of mortgage payment or other payments someone has, and the utilities, right? The cost to operate the house, and a lot of great benefits that a passive home ultimately provides you. From what I hear you saying, a lot of extra disposable income, because your utilities are ultimately a small fraction of the cost that they would be otherwise for, you know, homes of the same mortgage payment.
Great. So think of it this way. So myself or anybody else, you have that mortgage to run your house. But as Ontario Hydro tries to update the grid in the years to come, the cost of electricity is going to go up. I don't have that concern. Like if electricity went up 50% tomorrow, you're going to hear a lot of gnashing of teeth. I'll hear my colleagues at the fire hall complaining, and I won't even notice, because I'll notice it because the cost of everything else will go up, because electrical costs affect the whole economy. But for my house, I guess I'm insulated by that. You have your upfront costs to develop your solar system, but when you look at the dollars, if you're going to be in this house for the next 20 years, there's no comparison.
Yeah, and I mean, from a building perspective, mortgage payment perspective, there is a small incremental cost to build passive, but I remind people the reason that it's so small, just to clarify that point, is because the increased cost in a passive home is strictly relegated to the envelope of the building. So, you know, a little bit thicker walls, a little bit more insulation, a little bit more money goes into the windows and doors. But when you look at the actual incremental cost to build, it's as little as 5% most of the time. And the incremental cost to build is instantly offset by the savings in utilities. So cost of living, you know, is really the same. And what we're finding as a trend really moving forward is, you know, because of the rising interest rates and cost of land affordability, is simply build smaller, you know, and a 2,000 square foot home that was built 5 years ago. You know, I use our demonstration homes as an example. The original demo house we built was a 3,000 square foot 4-bedroom. The new one we built is a 1,600 square foot 4-bedroom. So at an increased cost to build, a big cost savings, even though there is those increased costs, by simply designing smart and building smaller buildings. Like, do you find that is a trend too, being directly involved with financing different types of projects?
I'm seeing both. Like, I find it strange. I'm from the UK originally, so I came from a country where houses were small. Like, it was a small house was a normal house, and I moved to Canada, and everything was big. Like, the houses were huge. what I'm finding for some of our younger clients, some are now understanding that you don't need 2,500 square feet. Canada, our size of our families have gone down, yet our house size has gone up. So that means we've got too much stuff. What I'm finding is people are starting to look at the fact that you have to be able to afford a house, and a house of 1,500 or 1,700 square feet is going to be more affordable than a house that's 2,500 square feet. It's larger. A larger house is more to heat, it's more to cool, and it's more to pay for right up front. I encourage people to realistically look at what their needs are, because I find sometimes if I'm getting involved in a new build like this, we can talk right from the beginning. So I have them work out a budget. How much money is realistic? What can you afford? If it's a young couple, okay, is your wife she gonna be on mat leave for a couple of years because she's having children? So you want to ask those questions so that they can make good decisions before they start. So right at the beginning, you want to make those decisions. You want to understand what is realistic. What do you really need? What do you want to accomplish? And then because you're designing a house in the beginning, in our case, everything from the closets to how much storage space was needed, we discussed it right from the beginning. So it was built into the house. So even though the house is not huge, it's extremely trying to think of the term. It was we made a really, really good use of space. So every bit of space in that house was planned out.
Yeah, that's something that, the great thing for, you mentioned storage there, that a big part of, thinking through the design apart from the rooms, having said that, is there anything in particular, do you think, that would allow someone to shrink the size of a passive home compared to another house? Like, are there any space savings specifically with respect to the design, knowing that you're building a passive home compared to a conventional home in your mind?
Not really. I think it was just because we were starting right from scratch. But my wife had certain things she wanted in this house. We love cooking. I love eating. She loves cooking. So the kitchen was designed in a certain way. The kitchen is a focal point, so we designed it with a fairly open concept. So from the living room to the dining room, the kitchen it's all one open area. So air flows nicely, light flows nicely, and it makes it feel more spacious than it would be. I think some of the older styles, the houses were more designed like cubicles. Everything's partitioned. In our case, other than the bedrooms, everything is nice and open, so air just flows through the house. The smell of good cooking flows through the house. But you want to factor in the space. So we designed it so that when the walls are being built, she measured out the size of IKEA buildings, and then we built that into the walls. Right from the beginning, we knew exactly how much. Well, I didn't. She did. So she knew exactly how much space is required for the shoulder of a hanger. She knew how much space is required for where to put things. So because of that, it was almost like the way the Japanese would do it, where you have a smaller place, but it's designed so that, just say, you can store underneath the beds. So I think she put a lot of smart planning into the design. I'll take zero credit. That was not my forte.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's becoming a more popular thing, building small and making everything as functional as possible. Yeah, Emerson, I want to ask you, do you have any final thoughts that you wanted to give out to people on this episode? I will say this. Emerson mentioned that his passive house is off the grid, and it is
Completely.
completely off the grid. It's based in Muskoka, Ontario. Is that right?
Yeah.
I'm still new to this place, but yeah, Muskoka, Ontario, up in the bush. You're living the passive house dream. Everyone I talk to, that I tell that I work for this company, they fall in love. They're like, we're in love with that company. Our dream is to buy a piece of land in the bush and build one of these homes and live off grid. You're living the dream. Is there any final thoughts that you'd like to give people today?
Yeah, like my biggest thought would be, or suggestion is before you engage, you want to reach out, you want to understand the dollars. You want to sit down and just take a look at it so we can plan out right from the beginning. This is what your budget is. This is how much money you can spend. This is what you will qualify for. So you want it's like going window shopping or looking for a car, but you don't know how much money you have to spend. Are you buying a Ferrari or are you buying a Honda Civic? Like you need to know the dollars. So I always encourage people, as soon as when you're ready to delve into the world of purchasing your first home, and especially a passive house, we sit down, we have a discussion, so you know exactly what you can afford. We know, so you don't want those surprises. You don't want to think, oh, I thought my credit was okay. No, you need to know. We need to know what all of those pieces are so that you can make good decisions.
And then financing is done as a result the right approach. And if you can't finance it, you can't build it, right? And listening to you, Emerson, with all your advice and your info is incredible. So we'd like to close out, I guess, with a thank you to you, Emerson, and all our viewers for watching. Remember, go passive, build yours today. And, experts like Emerson from a financial perspective are going to make that happen. Emerson, how can people, we'll put it in our caption on our channel, but how can someone easily get a hold of you? What's best? Email, phone?
Email or phone. My email is just Emerson, EMERSON at ndlc.ca, all lowercase. Or my cell phone is 647-273-8574. I don't work banking hours, so you call me when you want to call me.
Prank calls.
Yeah. Beautiful. Again, go passive, everyone, and thanks for joining.